Welcome, everyone. I'm Glenn McMahon, publisher and editor at Upriver Press. We are an independent publisher that's based in Colorado. Our books are written by leading scholars in the arts, economics, media, cultural affairs, and other topics. In an age that's filled with misinformation and disinformation, we hope to present high-level research from leading experts in ways that are accessible to wider audiences. Our books, which have been endorsed by 4 Nobel Prize-winning economists, are distributed by the great people at Independent Publishers Group in Chicago. Today, we have the honor of introducing you to Saeed Ahmed. He's the author of our recently published book, The Shady Economics of International Aid. Dr. Ahmed has a PhD in economics from Cambridge University. He's a leading expert in international finance and development, monetary policy, public finance, tax policy. In recent years, he's worked as a chief economist at Pakistan's Monetary Policy Committee and the State Bank of Pakistan. He's also worked as a senior advisor for the International Monetary Fund, their executive board. With his new book, Dr. Ahmed is addressing a major global concern that affects millions of people in developing countries. It's a controversial terrain. There are lots of different opinions about it. So it takes considerable courage to write about the topic. In this new book, Dr. Ahmed asks us to stop and think about the global economic development aid system, to look carefully at the data and the academic research, and then to consider ways that everyone can work together to improve the situation. After Dr. Ahmed finished writing his book, turmoil erupted around the international aid system, in part because the Trump administration rapidly dismantled USAID. Thankfully, Dr. Ahmed's book helps us to understand that not all international aid is the same. His writing offers a nuanced look at the different categories of aid. While strongly supporting humanitarian aid, he raises questions about the efficacy of economic development aid. He also avoids political bias, and he presents his arguments based on academic research and economic data. More personally, while working with Dr. Ahmed on his book over this past year, I've learned that he's a very compassionate thinker with a sincere motivation to help the world's poorest people. Tonight, or today, depending on your time zone, we invite you to submit questions using the Q&A button. Feel free to do that at any time during the conversation. Just use the Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your screen. Also, feel free to not be shy about sending questions, and we'll address as many as we can. Dr. Ahmed, I want to thank you for being here again. We look forward to having a conversation with you. You're in Australia, and so we're quite a ways away from each other. But anyway, thanks for joining us. And Dr. Ahmed, your work is based on extensive on-the-ground economic data, but it's also deeply rooted in your own personal experience as a child and as an adult in Pakistan. Before we talk about the economics, could you share a little about your upbringing and how that influenced your motivations for writing the book?
You're right. This book is deeply personal to me. It's a reflection of my lived experience. I was born into a low-income family in rural Pakistan, in Sangat, a district in the Sindh province. When I was a child, my family went through difficult financial times. I lost my father when I was just 10 years old. And from that point on, we really had to struggle to make both ends meet. I went to government schools and college in Sangat, and I have seen poverty up close, both as a child and as a young adult. I still visit my hometown regularly, and it's painful to see how little has changed. In fact, in many ways, things have gone worse, despite billions of rupees spent through government programs. So when I look at the economic data on poverty and literacy in rural Pakistan, it's not abstract to me. It hits homes. Just imagine in 2025, Sangad, my hometown, still has a basic literacy rate of only 43%. Even in the district of Pakistan's president, Asif Ali Zardari, half the population has no education. The conditions of health, sanitation, and access to water are even worse. The World Bank has just updated its poverty data. And imagine 45% of Pakistan's population lives in poverty. So for me, statistics on poverty, literacy, gender gaps, government effectiveness, these are not just numbers. They are a living reality, a constant reminder of the paralysis and stagnation that I have witnessed firsthand. I have witnessed the deterioration of public institutions in Pakistan. God has been very kind to me. I was fortunate to be selected for Pakistan's civil service, which is highly competitive, and I joined the Inland Revenue Service. During my government service, I was awarded the British Chevening Scholarship to study for an MSc in economics at the University of Warwick. Then I went on to complete my PhD in economics at Cambridge University. And I have had the privilege of working as the chief economist of Pakistan's central bank and representing my country and other emerging markets and developing countries at the IMF Executive Board in Washington, D.C. During my long career, I have heard many hyperbolic narratives about poverty alleviation advanced by international development agencies or donor agencies, as we commonly call them. However, based on economic evidence and experience, I have seen that these narratives do not fit on the ground realities. In fact, the international aid and development industry has turned poverty alleviation into a lucrative business. My book has clearly shown, based on economic data and research-based arguments, that international aid system is broken. So broken that it's hurting people. It's affecting hundreds of millions of people trapped in poverty in developing nations, and it's affecting taxpayers in wealthy nations, costing them over $200 billion annually. This is a huge amount.
Mm.
And it's while at the same time, this international aid industry is enriching the staff of donor agencies and their contractors and consultants. So people on both sides of the spectrum are being cheated. So while I have deep compassion for my own people and for the people in developing countries, I also feel a close affinity with the people in developed countries where I have spent 10 beautiful years of my life. My intellectual development was shaped by the UK's higher education system. So that's why it's so disheartening to see how donor agencies often waste taxpayers' money without making real change on the ground. So this book isn't just about the data, it's about the real people. And economics is about caring for people. And that's exactly what this book is trying to do. Bring people, real people, into the center of conversation.
Mhm.
So yes, my upbringing, my lived experience, and my advanced academic training in economics at UK's top universities, and my professional journey, all of that has shaped this book. By writing this book, I have tried to give back to the countries that shaped me.
I think while the book was in the editorial process, just 6 months ago, many dramatic and sudden changes occurred in, excuse me, in what we call the broad term, the international aid sector, right? However, you argue that not all international aid is the same, and there's a category for humanitarian aid, and there's another broad category for economic development aid. Your book focuses on the latter, but perhaps you could help us to understand, as you see it, the difference between these two categories and why it's important to make that distinction.
That's right. There are different categories of aid. There's a military aid, humanitarian aid, refugees assistance, and economic development aid. So what happens is that politicians and media, often lump everything together. so which is incorrect. So to understand aid and to evaluate the impact of international aid, it's important to recognize the distinction between different categories of aid. So let me just briefly explain because I believe some of our students in Pakistan have also joined this webinar. So for them, it will be useful information. Humanitarian aid is provided in response to emergency situations, such as geopolitical conflicts, like war in Ukraine or humanitarian crisis in Gaza, that displace innocent people. Its humanitarian is also provided in response to natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, cyclones, tsunami, etc., or public health crises such like the COVID-19 pandemic. Economic development aid, or simply we call it a development aid, aims to end poverty and promote long-term sustainable development in recipient countries. So when we talk about international aid in more official context, there's OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It tracks what they call official development assistance, or ODA. So ODA, in other words, is official aid. So the OECD defines ODA as government aid that promotes the economic development and welfare of people in developing countries. It includes humanitarian aid and post-conflict reconstruction, but it excludes military assistance or counter-narcotics operations and similar transfers. So whenever we refer to ODA or aid numbers in my book, let's bear in mind that it excludes military aid. So it's official aid. Uh, so aid can be delivered bilaterally from one country donor to another recipient country through donor agencies. So donor agencies such as USAID or UK's FCDO, which was previously called DFID, or German International Development Organization GIZ, or Japanese International Cooperation Agency JICA, or it can be delivered multilaterally, through international institutions like the United Nations, IMF, World Bank, or regional development banks such as Asian Development Bank or ADB in the context of Pakistan. So understanding the distinction between different categories is important, because donor agencies can hide their failure in economic development aid behind the banner of humanitarian aid. For example,
Mm.
if you're talking about economic development aid, or you criticize the performance of donor agencies, somebody can say that, look, they are doing such a wonderful work in Gaza, or they are helping out refugees in Syria or in Ukraine. So this distinction is important, because if you lump everything together, then it's misleading. And similarly, the frustration with the donors and development programs can end up discrediting the humanitarian aid. And that's exactly what we are seeing in the US, where 83% of US aid programs have been abruptly terminated due to Trump administration's frustration with what they call insane priorities in some countries, including the multi-million dollar funding for LGBT advocacy, sex changes, male circumcision, and media organizations. So you must have heard that the President Trump and the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt, they labeled these programs as waste, abuse, and fraud of US taxpayer dollars. So the abrupt shutdown, the downside is that the abrupt shutdown of US aid may have caused disruptions in humanitarian aid in the volatile regions. So that's why I think you raised this very important question. It's not simply academic question that we should understand different categories there, but this distinction is important. And this distinction is central focus of my book. I do not criticize much needed humanitarian aid, because humanitarian aid mostly delivers tangible relief to the affected populations. And the contributions of frontline workers operating in the most difficult and dangerous conditions should be acknowledged with genuine appreciation. I mean, these are the people who are risking their lives to serve humanity. So my book, the critique in my book does not extend to humanitarian aid. Now, second part of your question was what was the primary sources of funding? What are the primary sources of funding, and who are the key players? So the major players in the international aid system are the members of OECD's Development Assistance Committee. So this is a group of 32 countries and the European Union that contribute most to this funding. In 2023, the Development Assistance Committee contributed 224 billion US dollars in ODA. Imagine this 1 year figure, $224 billion in 2023. So about 82% of this ODA came from 6 countries: US, Germany, the EU, Japan, the UK, and France. So which totaled around 184 billion US dollars. So outside the Development Assistance Committee, there are other key players, especially the United Nations, which delivers a wide range of programs on education, health, climate change, social infrastructure, etc. So the UN system is composed of agencies such as UNDP, World Food Program, or IFAD. So in 2022, just to give you an idea, the United Nations income was $74 billion. And this income, so where does United Nations get this income? So United Nations income comes from mandatory contributions of its 193 members and also voluntary contributions from government and non-government donors. And if you look at the data, which I have shared in my book is rich in data because my primary audience was also, students of economics and those who are interested in development studies. So there is a wealth of information in my book that you see that if you look at this data, the US was is again the biggest bilateral donor for funding United Nations income. So US on an average has contributed around 24% of the United Nations total income, which was again followed by Germany, Japan, UK, China, Canada, and other countries. So UN also receives funding from European Commission or from public-private partnerships or academic institutions or foundations. Beyond these public system, the government and the multilateral institutions, there are private philanthropic organizations as well. And there are about 40 private foundations which report their data to OECD. So in 2022, these private foundations contributed around 11 billion US dollars towards international development efforts. So if you compare it with over $200 billion official aid, this looks modest, but now these private foundations, they are now become a growing player in international business. And some of those foundations, such as Gates Foundation, they have become household names in international development. And they are, tackling issues such as food security, health, climate change, gender equality. So just to clarify, my critique in the book is focused on official aid, which is funded by taxpayers' money in the it does not, I do not comment on the activities of Gates Foundations or private philanthropies.